Everybody, Dwayne Zeddy here for a second installation of pretty much my videos and everything like that. Today I'm going to talk about Israel. It seems like people are either one side or the next. They're either pro-Palestine or they're pro-Israel. They're not both. They're not, oh, I like this place and I like this place, I just want them to do well. They're more just Israel are a bunch of Nazis or Palestine is a bunch of crazy terrorists, and it's not true with both. Um, Israel cannot be Israel without Palestine, and Israel cannot be Israel without the Jews. People seem to forget that they are one and the same. They may be different religions, they may be different heritages, but they are all... Really? You're gonna scratch your neck on the bed while I'm trying to record. Can you stop that? Thank you. My dog. But they are all one and the same, and Israel was home first to the Canaanites. The Canaanites were the first forebearers of Israel, and then the Canaanites were defeated by the Egyptians, and then the Egyptians by the Assyrians, and the Assyrians by the Babylonians, and then the Babylonians by the Persians by the Greeks by the Macedonians by the Romans by the Arabs, and then the Arabs by the Crusaders, and then they kept switching back and forth between the Crusaders and the Arabs, and then the Ottomans took over from Turkey and came down, and then the British after the Ottoman Empire ended. Now, being that it was conquered by so many different lands, there's different cultures there's different people looking, different, races looking. You can get a really dark Arab or a really light Arab with green eyes, or you can get a really dark Jew person with, or a really light Jew person with blonde hair. It's really a toss-up between the Israelis, and being that it's Israel, it is the promised land. Now some people say, oh, it's not promised to the Jews, it's not promised to the Arabs, but it's promised to them. Actually, it's promised to the Israelis, and Israelis deal with Palestinians and Jews. It is in the Bible, it is in the Torah, and it is in the Quran. Now some may say, no, Dwayne, it's not in the Quran, I don't know what you're talking about, because you don't know that the Muslims want to take back Israel. And it is. You can look it up. Chapter 17, 100 to 104, chapter 13, 26. It's in there. I read the Quran, I've read the Quran, I've read the Bible, and I've read parts of the Torah. I read them because I don't want to be narrow-minded Christian. I want to be enlightened with all of what God has to say, pretty much. But that's a different video for a different time. Israel became its own country in 1947. After the end of World War II, with all the Holocaust survivors and all that stuff, Britain saw it fit to give the Jews a home, give them their own country. And during that time, after a year of being their own country, the Israeli-Arab War started, which was between Israel, and then they fought against Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, I believe, and Iraq. And they held their own, they fought back, and they kept their land that the British gave them. And then in, I think, the 50s, after realizing that, really, stop it, in the 50s, the PLO came, and the PLO means the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and that is because that the Egyptians... Stop. The Egyptians began to empower radical Palestinians with the thought of the Muslim Brotherhood and the thought of Jerusalem being Muslim, pretty much. And they began to do attacks on Egypt and all that stuff. I mean, on Israel. And it wasn't as bad until it got to the 70s, but I'll get into that in a little bit. But in the 60s, Israel now becoming a power, they began to hunt Nazis. They began to hunt the Nazi war criminals, and their most prominent was Adolf Eichmann, and they caught him in Argentina. Then during the time of the 50s to the 70s, there was a mass, pretty much, immigration into Israel from Jewish populations from across the world. And that numbered almost 1,500,000 people, I think, just came during that short span of time. But during that time, they had no homes, they had no settlements, they had nothing. It was worse than what Gaza looks right now. They lived in tent cities like people do in Africa in the refugee camps. There was no water, there was no nothing, but they stayed because it was the promised land. And that's not only Jewish people, that are Arabs that believe that it was the promised land as well, and they came there and they lived just as bad as them. And during that time, because they were so vulnerable, the Palestinian Fayadeen that was a part of PLO began to attack the camps and burn down the tents and all that stuff, and started doing really crazy things. And then in 67, before the end of that first migration, in 67, there was the Six-Day War between Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, and Iraq, I believe, too, as well. Iraq got back in there too, because there seems to be a kind of coalition between those nations. And Israel, being that they've been around for so long and so many people started being there, they began to kick butt. They took the Golan Heights from Syria, they took the West Bank from Jordan, they took the Sinai from Egypt, and they held it for a few years, actually. And during that time, the world began to see that Israel is actually a power. Israel can stand on its own and everything like that. So, doing so, once they had a ceasefire, Israel pulled out of the Sinai again to go back into their lands, and Egypt used that time to go into Gaza and occupied Gaza. Now, during this time, 700,000 Palestinians fled from the Egyptian-controlled Gaza because the Egyptians were persecuting the Palestinians. Egyptians were persecuting the Palestinians. Let me say it one more time. 700,000 Palestinians fled into Israel. And during this time, this is when Hamas started to grow, because the Muslim Brotherhood was there, and they began to, implant their whole ideology of Muslim Brotherhood, hence the name. And they began to attack more and more. And during the 72 Summer Olympics, they attacked and killed 34 athletes, Israeli athletes. And then again in 78, they had the Sea Road Massacre, I think it's called, and they killed a few people during that time. And then in the 80s and the 90s, after the last real war that they had, because after the attacks, Israel went on the offensive and started attacking, Egypt and Syria, to push back this terrorists that were happening, starting to come. And during that time, there was another mass migration of people from Russia and Jews from Ethiopia and stuff like that, because it was a time of peace and more people needed to be into the promised land. And during that time, after they beat Egypt and Syria, the first Intifada, I think it's called, happened, because the Palestinians with the radical ideology began to see this as a problem, because more and more Jews were getting into Israel. And during that time, they started bombing buses, they started bombing shops and homes, and doing the things that we know Hamas to do today. This is when it really started, in the 1987. And when the first Gulf War happened, Hamas and PLO supported Saddam Hussein, and Saddam Hussein saw this as a chance to give them rockets and give them weapons and give them all this stuff. And this is where they have all these ancient rockets from. This is where they're shooting these rockets. That's the person they got it from, because they supported him. And Israel wanted to get involved into the Gulf War, but the U.S. and the UN told them not to, and Israel heeded their words and didn't get involved, because Israel cares about what the outside world has to think and has to say. And in 2000, during the Camp David summit, President Clinton, he was talking to Yasser Hidifia, something like that. He was talking to this guy Yasser, and they proposed a two-state solution. Israel did, and he denied it. And then the second Intifada happened, and this was worse than the first one, and there was more killings and more casualties and all this stuff. And being that Israel wanted to make things work and make things happen, they pulled out of Gaza, because Egypt had pulled out and they went in, and now they pulled out to let the Palestinians have their own territory. But this was good. This helped the Intifada stopped, But then Hamas and the PLO got their foothold in Palestine. They got their country pretty much. And this is when they started sending rockets in 2000 and doing all this craziness. And then the first Gaza war happened in November of 2012. And they were sending the rockets like we know now. And then Israel went in for only 8 days, and it stopped, and they had a ceasefire, and Gaza put their own implication in, and Israel put their own implication in, and this is where the whole wall comes into play, and the whole border and all that stuff. And then again in July 2014, the one we know now, Operation Protective Edge, happened, and this was when they started sending mass rockets. And Israel got the Iron Dome because of the rockets coming out of Gaza and the rockets coming from Hezbollah in Jordan. It's not just because they needed that because they knew that they were going to start fighting the Gazans and killing Palestinians. No, they got it. It's a defensive system. It's not an attack system. And now I know that I'm pretty much upplaying Israel, but Israel has done some horrible things as well. Israel, there's bad people everywhere. Israel, in I think the 80s, there was a protests going on, and because the tension between the Palestinians and they were rioting and breaking stuff and doing all this stuff, border guards actually shot and killed 20 people and injured another 150. And then a lot of children get hurt between the crossfire. A lot of innocent people get hurt, and because what Hamas does is they implant themselves within the populace who are angry about what's going on. They implant themselves, and when Israel retaliates, they make it seem as if Israel is retaliating against only innocent people, but they are really looking for those who are causing the trouble. Now, I know some of you guys are like, oh, well, Palestine has always been Palestine, and it's always going to be there, and this stuff, but the word Palestine comes from Hadrian, Emperor Hadrian during the Roman times, when he took the provinces of Galilee and the provinces of Pella and made it into Syria, Palestinia, and that's where the name Palestine comes from. It was not called Palestine during the Roman, during the Greeks, during the Macedonians, even during the Arabs. It was Judea or Canaan. Now, Palestinians are a group of Arabs that were originated in Israel, that came from Israel. They are pretty much Israelites. They are just Muslims or Christians or this or that. There's not just one group that has always been there. If anything, the one group that has always been there are the Canaans. That's it. The Israelis came over from Egypt, or they came back from Babylon, or they came from Europe or Russia or Africa, but that land is promised to them, promised to the Palestinians, and promised to the Israelis, because it is in both Bibles, the Quran and the Bible, and it is in the Torah. And you guys can look it up, you guys can see what I'm talking about. But what people seem to forget is that this land is for the both of them. This land is for all Israelis, all tribes of Israel, not just Jews or not just Muslims. And what people are doing is they're taking one side and forgetting the other side, that they're human. Everybody is human. Everybody deserves to have their own country. Everybody deserves to be free. And with this hate that's going around, with Hamas forming this hate towards Israel, it is making the Palestinians look as if they all support Hamas. I can say maybe 2% of Palestinians support Hamas. A lot of them do not want Hamas there anymore because they are making it really difficult to live in Palestine, really difficult for them to have their own country. They want a two-state solution, but it is impossible when you have the West Bank and Gaza. There needs to be a city-state solution where each major city is its own state, ruled by the majority of what the race is there. Say it's Arab, it would be a Palestinian state. Say it's Jewish, it would be a Jewish state. And then the Christians have their little enclaves, and the other people have their own little enclaves. But they need to come up with an idea to get rid of Hamas so that the Israelis will be more willing to work with the Palestinians, more willing to work with democracy, instead of a doctrine that says that Israel must be destroyed. If you destroy Israel, there will be nowhere to go. But then some people say, oh, Israel are Nazis, Israel are killing people and doing this and doing that. But if you really look at it, if Israel were Nazis, there would be no Palestine. There would be no Gaza, no West Bank. There would only be Palestinians in death camps being killed. There wouldn't be any chance to protest, any chance for them to have their own little enclave, no chance for Hamas. There would be no Palestine at all. If Israel wanted to do something that all these people are talking about, they're terrorists and all this, there would be no Palestinian people. You guys seem to forget that Israel has taken on entire countries at the same time. A little group like Hamas, a little group like the Palestinians would stand no chance against Israel if they were the real terrorists like everybody says. People need to realize that Israel has done bad things, and so has the Palestinians. But it's not the people. It is the governments, Hamas and the government of Israel. They have made some poor choices, and it has led to this hate that is in the Holy Land that we do not need. We need to open our eyes and open our mouths and tell these people who are running these nations that they need to look out for their people and not themselves and their governments, because the people are the ones suffering, not the governments, the people. People are dying, people are starving, people have no lights, people have no water, there's rockets being sent into schools, babies are being blown up, there are craziness happen, buses are being blown up with tourists in it going to the West Wall. We need to stop this form of hate and this form of terrorism and work together, because this is the Holy Land. This is the land where Muslims, Jews, Christians, this is our land. This is the land of God. And the land of God should be one. It should be the safest place in the world. It shouldn't be this way. There shouldn't be walls, there shouldn't be borders, there shouldn't be big towering turret placed encampments looking over into Gaza. There shouldn't be any of that. There should be peace and unity. Plain and simple. But that's just me.